Before any debate about God begins. Before anyone says, I don't believe. Before arguments are exchanged. Before evidence is demanded. Something already happened. Quietly. Automatically. Without a vote. An agreement was made. No one announced it. No one negotiated it. And yet without it, the debate could not even start. Two people sit down, one believer, one atheist. They disagree about God, religion, meaning, reality itself. But despite their disagreement, they already agree on something far deeper. They agree that arguments matter. They agree that logic applies. They agree that truth is something more than opinion. They agree that some conclusions should be accepted if the reasons are good enough. And none of that is obvious. Because debates don't begin in a vacuum. They begin inside a framework, a shared background of assumptions about reality, reason, and meaning. Tonight, we're not going to ask whether God exists. We're going to ask something stranger. What must already be true for atheism to argue against God at all? And why does that question refuse to go away? Part 1. What atheists and theists already agree on. Let's start with something important. This is not an attack on atheists. It's not a caricature. It's not a gotcha. We're going to present the atheist position as strongly and fairly as possible. Modern atheists are not irrational. They care deeply about evidence. They value critical thinking. They respect science, logic, and intellectual honesty. When atheists debate God, they don't say, "This is just my feeling." They say, "This is false. That argument doesn't work. Your conclusion doesn't follow." Those statements already assume something massive. They assume logic applies universally. Contradictions are unacceptable. Truth exists independently of belief. Reason can obligate belief. Evidence counts for something beyond preference. In other words, both sides already agree that reason is authoritative. That's the silent agreement. And notice something important. This agreement is not emotional. It's not cultural. It's not pragmatic. It's normative. It's about what ought to be believed. If someone says, "Your argument is invalid," they are not describing a brain state. They are making a claim about what should not be accepted. Debate only makes sense if reason has authority over belief. Without that authority, argument collapses into noise. So before atheism can argue against God, it must already affirm something profound. That reality is intelligible, and that minds are meant to track truth. But why should that be true? Part 2. Why debate requires more than opinions. Imagine a world where beliefs are nothing more than biological outputs. Thoughts are chemical reactions. Conclusions are neural firings. Beliefs are survival tools, nothing more. In such a world, what does debate even mean? If your belief that God does not exist, and my belief that God exists, are both just outcomes of different brain wiring, then who is wrong? You could say, your belief is maladaptive. But maladaptive doesn't mean false. You could say, your belief doesn't help survival. But survival doesn't equal truth. Debate only works if belief is answerable to something beyond function. When we debate, we assume some beliefs are objectively mistaken. Some reasons are genuinely better than others. Some conclusions ought to be abandoned. That ought is doing heavy philosophical lifting. Because neurons don't issue obligations. Physics doesn't tell you what you should believe. Evolution doesn't care whether beliefs are true, only whether they help organisms persist. And yet atheists argue as if truth matters. Not just psychologically. Not just socially. But objectively. They expect others to change their minds when shown better reasons. That expectation only makes sense if reason is not reducible to matter. So here's the tension. Atheism depends on reason. But reason doesn't behave like a physical object. Which raises a question atheism rarely asks. Part 3. The hidden assumption. What is reason, exactly? Not how it works biologically. Not which neurons fire. But what kind of thing reason is. Logic doesn't weigh anything. Truth doesn't occupy space. Validity isn't a chemical. You cannot point a microscope at the law of non-contradiction. And yet we all obey it. If someone says, "This statement is both true and false in the same sense at the same time," we don't respond with curiosity. We respond with rejection. Not because it's unhelpful, but because it's impossible. Logic is not optional. It is binding. And binding norms are strange in a universe described entirely by particles and forces. Here's the silent assumption. Reason has authority over matter, not the other way around. Your brain doesn't get to vote on whether logic applies. Logic applies whether you like it or not. That's not how physical laws work. Gravity doesn't tell you what you ought to do. Logic does. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If the universe is nothing but matter in motion, why does abstract reason rule it? Part 4. Why this is awkward for atheism. At this point, many atheists respond. Evolution explains reason. But evolution explains behavior, not truth. Evolution selects for survival, not accuracy. A belief can be false and still useful. If believing a rustling bush is a predator helps survival, even if it isn't, evolution favors the belief. Natural selection does not reward truth. It rewards fitness. So if our reasoning faculties are the product of blind evolutionary forces, why trust them when they move beyond survival concerns? Why trust them in philosophy? In metaphysics? In abstract reasoning? Atheists often say, science corrects errors. But science presupposes logic. Science presupposes reason. Science presupposes trust and cognition. You can't use reason to justify reason without circularity. So atheism faces a quiet problem. It relies on rational norms it cannot ground. This is not a refutation. It's a tension. Atheism works intellectually. But it works by borrowing something it cannot explain. Part 5. Why this is not a God of the gaps argument. Let's pause here. This is not a God of the gaps move. We are not saying, science hasn't explained X, therefore God. We are saying something subtler. We are asking, what must already be true for science, reason, and debate to exist at all? This is a question about foundations. Not mechanisms. Not gaps in knowledge. But the preconditions of intelligibility. You don't explain logic by discovering more physics. Physics already assumes logic. You don't explain truth by appealing to neurons. Neurons don't generate normativity. This is not about ignorance. It's about coherence. Part 6. Theism as a strange fit. Now something unexpected happens. When we step outside atheism and look at classical theism, not pop religion, not caricatures, we find something interesting. In classical theism, reality is grounded in mind. Truth reflects divine intellect. Reason participates in a rational order. Logic is not accidental. The universe is intelligible because it comes from intelligence. You don't have to accept this explanation. But notice something important. It actually explains the silent agreement. It explains why reason binds belief. Why truth matters. Why logic governs reality. Theism doesn't add reason to the universe. It expects it. Which raises a strange reversal. Atheism critiques theism as unnecessary. But atheism itself depends on features of reality that look suspiciously non-atheistic. Part 7. Why this matters beyond debate. This isn't just academic. If reason is just a survival tool, then truth is optional. If truth is optional, then meaning is constructed. If meaning is constructed, then moral obligation dissolves. And yet modern culture still speaks in moral absolutes. We condemn injustice. We demand accountability. We expect rational discourse. All of this rests on the same silent agreement. That reality is not absurd. That reason is not an illusion. That truth is not a trick of evolution. Atheism wants all of these things. It just doesn't want their source. Part 8. The question that won't go away. So here we are. Atheism debates God passionately, intelligently, often convincingly. But every argument it makes rests on a foundation it never examines. A foundation that says, Reason is real. Truth is binding. Meaning is not arbitrary. The debate against God begins only because these things are already assumed. Which leads to the final question. Not a conclusion. Not a sermon. Just a question. If reason, truth, and meaning must already exist before atheism can argue against God, then what kind of universe are we actually living in? And why does that question refuse to disappear? Conclusion. The silence before the argument. Before the first objection. Before the first rebuttal. Before the first appeal to evidence. There is silence. And inside that silence lives an agreement no one voted for. An agreement that reason matters. That truth binds belief. That meaning is not nothing. You can reject God. You can doubt religion. You can critique theology. But the agreement remains. And perhaps that is the most interesting thing of all.